Hello students, we will start the class today. And today we will be having the last part of story writing, which is a very important aspect of stories, which I have been telling you from the first class, which is called conflict. And as I have said before, I'm saying it again, this is probably the most important part of a story. And without a good conflict, the story will not be a successful or a good one. Okay, it will be a very dull or boring or a bad story. And a conflict is the most interesting part as well. All the parts of the story, like we have learned, the beginning, middle, end, the starting from the exposition and the introduction of the story till the climax and the resolution, everything is centered, revolves around the conflict in the story. All right. Basically, it's what the problem is, what the characters are doing in the story. What are they supposed to do? What are they supposed to achieve? Okay, all these things. So conflict in a story is a struggle between opposing forces. Okay, there is a good force, there is a bad force, or there is something for you, there is something against you, and of course you are struggling. That is basically a conflict. Characters must act to confront these forces, and there is where a conflict is born. You want to become a very successful businessman, but you don't have money to study. That's a conflict. So how the characters are going, through all the hardships and how they're going through everyone, because they don't have any money, and how he is becoming a successful businessman, that's a conflict. The character wants to kill a monster, but it's so much difficult. The roads are, it's the valleys, the forests, the mountains, so much dangerous. So the character has to survive everything and go and fight with the monster and kill him. That's a conflict. So whatever your character is supposed to do, what the struggle the character is going through, okay, that is the conflict in the story. If there is nothing to overcome, there is no story. If the story is the very brave king is going to kill a monster, and you are writing that the king have gone to the monster's place and killed the monster, it is not any kind of a story, right? It's not an interesting story. You have to put all these things which will make the story interesting, right? You want to become the character wants to become a very successful businessman, and he just became a very successful businessman. That's it. There is no story in it. No one wants to hear the story. If you tell, like I said in the last class also, if something interesting happens in your life, then only you come to your home and tell your parents, something, so such interesting thing happened. Or you go to your dorm and talk to your friends that what happened today. You tell something very interesting. Now, if it's a normal day, like you get up from your bed, you had your breakfast, you came to class, you study, you went back, right? There is nothing very interesting, nothing happened. Whatever you wanted to do, you have done it very easily. Then you don't tell anyone that, I have done all these things. Or else if you tell, your friend will be bored, right? So same thing with a story also, same thing with a film also. You're showing a story of a person, you're showing a film about a character because some problem have happened to that character, because the character is going through some struggle, because the character have faced some challenging situations, and whether the character has overcome those challenging situations or how the character is overcoming that challenging situation. That is your story is all about, right? And that is the conflict. And that conflict in a story creates and drives the plot. last class we have learned about the plot, creates the plot and move it forward, right? So the basic purpose of conflict, why we actually have the conflict, what is the usage of this conflict, is conflict introduces opposing belief system. You know, there is a bad, there is a good, there is someone against you, there is someone for you. So there is an opposing belief system, wants or goals, right? The character wants to become something, but he has these problems in front of him. He has a goal, but he has these, challenges in front of him. Okay, not just to entertain the viewer. Of course, it will entertain the viewer, but not only that reason, but to show the character grow, to show the character in another way. What the character does if he faces a lot of challenges, how the character overcomes those challenges. So that is what you want to show. So if you are making a character, you want to make it mentally strong, physically strong, all these things. How will you tell if whether a person is physically strong? If you give him a very tough thing to do, right? If you tell him that lift a very heavy rock, and if that person can lift that very heavy rock, then only you can say, okay, this, he is very strong. Or how will you say that a person is mentally strong? You give him a problem. How will you know that someone is very good in maths? You give him a tough maths problem. If he can solve it, then you can tell that, oh, he's very good in mathematics. If you don't give him any problem, then you cannot tell that that character, that person is very good in maths, right? How can I tell that you are good students? When I will give you the questions, you will write the answers properly. Then only I can say that, okay, you have studied really well, right? If I don't give you a challenge, if I don't give you a question, I can't tell whether you are a good student or not, right? So same thing in a story for a character. So if you are actually giving some difficult situations, some challenges, some opposing, belief systems, etc., then only the characters, if they become interesting, and you can actually find the characters doing something, or else the characters don't have any worth in a story. A character's goals and actions are dictated by their personal beliefs, right? What you believe. If a person is good, then he will do good things. If a person wants to harm someone or to kill someone or to, do some negative things, then he is a bad person, right? If the character received anything they wanted from the beginning, there wouldn't be a story. So you give the character whatever the character have wanted from the beginning, and there is no problem for the character, as I said, then there will be no story. When a character overcomes enough obstacles that challenges their belief system, they typically come out of the other side changed. So the character evolves. Like in the character discussion we have discussed, how the character is evolving in a story, how the character is developing in a story. Maybe a character is very weak at the beginning, but the more challenges you are giving him, the more conflict you are creating in the story, the character is becoming stronger and stronger. And at the end, the character is a changed character, right? You really like him in the end. At the beginning, you might not like him. So that is created, that interest in the for the character is created by an interesting conflict. Got it? So it's all about the development of the character, and in the course, the development of the story, of the plot. Okay, so you introduce conflict in a story to make the characters, face a lot of problems, to make him interesting and to make him, likable, or whatever. If you're showing, for example, imagine a movie, Iron Man. You have shown in the beginning that Iron Man is this very powerful, very powerful person. Now, how will you actually think, or how will you decide whether he is a really good character or whether he is a hero character at all? You give him a very bad villain who wants to kill everyone, who wants to destroy the world. Iron Man fights for his life and, you know, save the whole world against that very bad villain, right? Then you automatically decide, okay, this character is a hero character. Got it? So that is what we do when we are introducing a very strong conflict in a story. Okay, we make the characters more and more evolved. We make the characters more and more interesting. And in the course, we make the plot of the story much more exciting. Okay, because plot, you remember the plot, right? When you start with the rising action, you introduce it, then you start with the rising action, then the climax. So if the conflict is very much interesting, this middle part till the climax will be extremely interesting. Then you will have a good story. Next comes the entertainment value. Of course, the entertainment value becomes deeper and richer when the audience is able to walk away with a new perspective, right? So you find the story very interesting. You got some new ideas. You find that, okay, if I face this kind of problems, there are films, you know, there are movies, and there are stories which really inspire us. It really helps us in our real life to fight problems. We realize that, okay, through a story, when I'm showing someone, or when I'm telling someone that this is a character and he have gone through so much hardship, so much problems, and still he have become such a good person, such a successful person in his life, then reading that story or seeing that film, we ourselves get influenced, right? That, okay, I can also do that, right? So of course, it adds to the entertainment value, where where the audience gets much more interested, much more entertained by the whole story and the whole, the idea of the plot. So apart from these purposes, why we should create story, what is the reason to create conflict in the story, is to, as I said, provides purpose. A conflict in the story provides purpose, why you are wanting to tell the story. Okay, by establishing the conflict in the beginning and resolving the conflict by the end of the story, you give your story a direction, a motion, and a purpose. That's why you are talking about this character. First question, when you are reading a story, you in the beginning, or when you are seeing a film, in the beginning they are showing some characters, right? The main character, the protagonist, or the antagonist, or the other side character. The first question that comes to you in your mind is, why I am seeing the story of these characters, right? Then you come, okay, the characters are doing this and this. The characters are facing this and this problem, and I am seeing what are the problems they are facing. Number one, how they are overcoming the problems. Number two, right? So this is basically the story, all right? So if there is no conflict, the story will not have that, the beginning, middle, and the end, and it will be very like a very simple. It will drift away. It will go away. You will lose interest. Got it? So it provides a purpose to the story. Why you are telling that story? It answers that question. Why you are telling that story? Okay, I want to tell the story to tell you about the great struggle of the king who saved his kingdom by killing the very dangerous monster. Got it? So when you are asking this question, why you are telling this story, you are getting the answer that I'm telling the story to, tell you about this very powerful king who have fought so, bravely with the very dangerous monster in order to save his kingdom. Right. So when you are giving this answer, you are talking about the main conflict in the story, that the king is facing this dangerous monster. That's the conflict. Okay. So it gives a purpose to your storytelling, helps character development. Second main reason, as I said, in the purpose of the story also, it creates a character, it develops a character, it makes the character more relatable. Relatable means, see, it's a very, very important thing. Even when we have studied characters in the story, we have talked about this. It should be relatable. We should understand them. We should understand their emotions, expressions, their acting, their activities, why he is doing this. It becomes very close to us, right? So this very interesting conflict in the story will make the character do a lot of actions, right? Reveal their emotions, do a lot of actions, do a lot of activities, and that will tell us a lot of things about the character. Okay, if something, for example, if someone is doing a bad thing in front of you, then you will go and tell him, no, don't do this. This is bad. Whatever you're doing, this is bad. So this talks about your character. I will understand how you are actually if I see you in this situation. If you just look away and go, and the person continues to do a bad thing, then I will say that, okay, you are not a good person because you didn't stop him doing something which is bad, right? A person is stealing from someone and you are going and stopping him, tells us about you. If you are not stopping that person who is doing a crime, then you are also a criminal. You are also a bad person, right? So when I'm giving you a problem, how you are solving the problem tells us about you, right? If I tell you to write an exam and you do the cheating, you copy from somewhere and write, and that time you are not a good student. If you are writing from whatever you have understood, whatever you have listened in the class, then you are a good student. Whether you are you are a good person, whether you are getting good marks or not, that's secondary, but you are a good person. If you are just cheating from somewhere, then you are not a good person, right? So when I'm giving you a problem, the way you are solving the problem, when I'm giving you making the character face a conflict in the story, the way the character goes up against the force, opposing force, their actions and emotions reveal their character traits. Character traits means actually how they are. This creates compelling characters that are multidimensional, that has various layers, right? And more relatable to the reader. Most of us are multidimensional. Multidimensional means you might have a fight with your friend. You might not be talking with him, right? But if your friend needs a help from you, you might be helping him, right? So you might have some problems with him. At the same time, because he is your classmate, because he is your friend, you might be also helping him. That means there are layers in your character. You are not just very good or very bad. You have some layers in your character. Sometimes you do some stupid things, some bad things. All of us do. But sometimes you do, or mostly you do good things, right? So we are all like that. Sometimes I scold you, right? If you are not listening to me, I might scold you, or sometimes I might say you are very good students, right? So in a story also, our characters mostly are multidimensional, or they have different layers in their character. And then only they become very much relatable, or the reader can connect with them. The readers can understand them, what they are doing. Okay. So these are the two basic reasons why we actually create a conflict in a story, to provide a purpose, answering the basic question of why you are telling the story, and for character development, when a character facing a problem tells us much about that particular character, okay, and makes us relatable and makes us understand that person or that character. Okay, so I think you have got a basic idea about conflict, right? Now there are different types of conflict. Basically there are 6 different types of conflict. The first one is person versus self. So person versus, uh, I mean, my internal conflict. Okay. So this is a kind of character conflict when a character is facing a problem with himself. Okay, difficulties with himself because of his past, because of his mindset, his profession or his job or his values and ethics, etc. Okay, so for example, let us take an example where a character has a very bad past. He has been an assassin. Okay, assassin means he have killed people, right? But due to some reason, he is, he wants to change. He don't want to kill people. Why will he want to kill people? Maybe for money he have done, or maybe he was like he was like with gangsters and everything, and he have killed people. But he don't like that. He wants to get away from that, right? So there is this a conflict, an internal conflict, an emotional conflict, right? He's doing something which he doesn't like, right? So how he gets away from it. So at the last of the story, maybe he have changed to become a hero and save someone. So in the beginning, he was a character who was killing someone, but through the story, he have changed. His mindset have changed because of his ethics and values. He had all these things. He's slowly changing and becoming a hero, and he's saving someone at the last. So this is an internal conflict. You know, sometimes you feel, I guess, as students, I used to feel like that also, and I hope you guys also feel like the same. Sometimes we feel that okay, I don't want to study today, right? I really don't want to study, but I need to study. So we have these two feelings at the same time. Sometimes we are feeling, no, we don't want to study. At the same time, we are feeling, okay, fine, I need to study because I need to learn this subject, right? So what comes out? There is a fight inside us, but something at the end happens, or something I find, okay, maybe some 10 minutes I'll just go through the PPT, or 10 minutes I'll just study, right? Like that we do. So always there is an internal conflict inside us, right? Sometimes we feel like, okay, I am doing, I have to get up in the morning and help people or do something in the society. Sometimes we feel, no, I don't want to do it. I just want to enjoy my life. I want to go to a theater, watch a film, or to go somewhere. Sometimes we feel, no, we should go and help someone. We should go and, do some social services. So all these things are our internal conflict, right? Ultimately, we do something that we feel like or that we decide in our own mind, right? So this here we usually follow a character's internal growth, how he is growing as a person. Okay, so this is the basic first type of conflict where a person versus self, himself. Okay, person versus person, it's a very simple thing. A hero, there is a villain. A character versus character conflict. Okay, Thanos versus Avengers. Okay, so person versus self was Tony Stark. If you know the character Tony Stark, I hope that all of you have seen Avengers. I gave a lot of examples from this Avengers because it's very easy, to describe all the characters and everything. And I hope that all of you have seen. I'm sure the guys have seen, and I don't know about the girls because mostly the guys are very fond of Avengers, right? I think all of you have seen. If you have not, try to see the films. It's very, very interesting. Even for the girls, I will say try to see the films. They're very interesting. So Iron Man in this is this one character. People who don't know him, he's Tony Stark. He's a character who used to sell this guns, okay, for different wars. Okay, he used to sell these guns, and he was a businessman. He didn't care about anything. He was a very selfish person. He was just a businessman. He didn't care about anyone else. But when he became Iron Man, he wanted to change himself. He thought that, okay, let me do good for people. Got it? So this is an example as person versus self. So Iron Man, this Tony Stark person, Tony Stark had that conflict within himself, that he now don't want to be a selfish person. He just wants to do good for others, right? So person versus person is a hero versus a villain, right? A general fight between two characters, mostly the protagonist and the antagonist, right? So this is like the Avengers versus Thanos, or like the hero versus villain in a film. Okay. So that is one second type. Third type is person versus society. Now, if you are showing like unemployment, there is so much unemployment. A character who have done a very, who is very much educated also, but he's not getting a job. Okay, I have told you about a film, if you remember, The Pursuit of for Happiness. Okay, it's a film. You can see the film Pursuit for Happiness. There, it's a father, the protagonist character. He is a father, and he has a boy. Okay, boy child, and he is struggling to get a job, even though he is well educated, but still he is not getting a job. Okay, so that is like, so he's giving interviews, he's going through to different offices. He wants to do something because he have to earn, right? He have a boy, he have to give him food, but still he is not getting any kind of good jobs. Okay, this is like the person versus society. So when you are talking about a character against some harmful laws, okay, there are some laws which might be harmful or which might be 150 years old, 1,000 years old laws, still we practice them and it might be harmful, right? It creates a division among people, it creates a division among society. So there might be a character who is fighting against this social system, okay? So these kind of stories is where a person versus a society, a social system. Okay. Third option is, fourth option is a person versus nature. So all these tornado movies, right? All these, what kind of films like Jaws, where there is Godzilla. You have seen, I think you have, all of you have seen this Godzilla or Pacific Rim, right? All these things, the Pacific Rim, it's not actually person versus nature, but Godzilla or King Kong and all these kind of films, right? Where we are seeing, huge earthquake destroyed everything, right? And how the characters are surviving. Or there will be an asteroid coming towards Earth and how the characters are surviving, right? So these kind of things, or there is a huge monster where, like Jurassic Park films. All of these are basically person versus nature. So this kind of conflict is also there. Fifth kind, person versus machine. The protagonists fight with the machines, like in sci-fi stories, okay? Like Aliens, sometimes Terminator stories, if you have seen Terminator films. So there is this robot who comes from the future, right? And he's coming from the future and killing everyone. So that is when the characters are fighting against him, right? There are other different sci-fi stories also, movies also, where, this kind of conflict is shown. The sixth type is person versus fate, okay, or supernatural, like ghost stories. All right. So, sorry, there is a mistake over here. Person versus fate or the supernatural, right? Like ghost stories, this kind of horror thriller movies, all these things are the protagonist fights with the unknown or the supernatural forces, right? So these basically, these 6 types we can actually see in many, many movies, many, many stories, okay, where these kind of conflicts are done. For example, the first one is person versus self, his own internal, a character's own internal fight, own internal conflict. A person versus person, where there is 2 characters, one good, one bad, right? Or one protagonist, one antagonist, and they are fighting. There's a conflict, there's a struggle between them. Person versus society, where the character is fighting against social system, harmful laws, unemployment, human rights issues, establishment of the society, etc. Right? Person versus nature, where they are fighting with the forces of nature. Okay. So another person versus machine. Right. So the sci-fi, the science fiction stories are basically of this kind, where there is a machine, there is an AI or robot or something which is fighting against the characters, right? Person versus fate or the supernatural, where the protagonist is fighting against unknown forces or ghost or something. So ghost stories here are an example. Okay, so basic 6 types of conflict we use in most of the stories, depending on what kind of story you are writing. And overall, there can be 2 types of conflict, which is internal conflict, okay, where there is a personal or psychological battle within the mind and psyche of the character. Inside the mind of the character, there is an emotional battle, there is an emotional struggle going on, and you are showing that conflict. You are talking about that conflict. The character's drive to resolve this creates a plot and its drama. Okay, this is all about the emotional journey of the character who goes on in a story. What's the emotional journey? Okay, external conflict is struggle between character and any obstacle or forces outside himself that he must overcome to reach his goal, such as another individual, in person versus person, nature, society, whatever it can be. It has to be an obstacle between our character and a very important goal, what we have to achieve. Okay, so one is the internal struggle, the personal or psychological battle, and another is the external struggle, what he is facing in front of him. And the first one is what he is facing inside him. Okay, most stories has both these internal and external conflict in them. So if the character is facing some challenges, and to overcome the challenges, he has to go through emotional pressures, right? Your challenge is to climb a mountain. Okay, that is the external challenge. Before climbing the mountain, you have, you will think that whether you can climb it, whether you are powerful enough, whether you are fit enough, what if you just fell down? So you will have these fears. But finally, if you decide to climb, then you will overcome everything, right? You will be mentally strong. So it's not only about the physical fitness, it's also about your mental preparation. Got it? So when I'm talking about a character who is climbing a mountain and that's the story, then I can't only write about the external conflict. I can't only write about how the how the mountain is, or how difficult the roads are, how difficult it's to climb, etc. I have to write what is going on inside that mind of the character. Sometimes he is so afraid, sometimes he is really feeling exciting, but ultimately he is, getting that mental strength, or he is developing himself to think that, no, I can do it. Got it? So but only if I'm talking about the character is feeling all these things, it might get boring. If only I'm talking about the external conflict, it might get idiotic, it might get dull, right? So mostly, in most of the stories, you will see the characters you will see that the conflict is told as internal conflict and external conflict. Okay, sometimes you character to reach something, to gain something, to to overcome the external conflict, he has to lose a lot of things. Okay, that time he faces the internal conflict. Okay, so your story should have both the internal and the external conflict applied to it. Right? So once one part you have to write about the external problems faced by the characters. In another part, in the same part, you have to write about how the character is feeling and how about his emotions. Got it? So for example, a hero is going to slay a monster. He is facing a lot of physical hardship because the monster is too strong, right? This is the external conflict I am talking about. Though he is the hero, he is also afraid. Every single one of us is always is afraid of something or the other, right? So even if the hero is a very powerful king and everything, still he is afraid standing in front of that huge big monster because he is very strong. What if he dies? But to fight, he is fighting and killing the monster because he wants to save his kingdom. He has to overcome his fear. He has to be brave. Got it? So this is an internal conflict. So at the same time, you are talking both about internal conflict, how the character is feeling, how why I mean he is afraid and he is slowly overcoming his fear, and also you're talking about the external conflict, his fight with the monster. Okay, so both of these types of conflict you have to mention, the internal and external. In this list, person versus self is particularly an external conflict. Okay, sorry, internal conflict. There is no external conflict in the person versus self. The first one. Okay, this is a proper internal conflict. I'll write here. And by the end of this class, I will send you this PPT to everyone. Okay. And all these characters, person versus person, person versus society, person versus nature, all these are examples of external conflict. Okay. So all these are examples of external conflict. But the point is, when you are even talking about an external conflict, okay, for example, when you are talking about a person versus society, which is an external conflict, okay, you have to talk about how the character is feeling. Sometimes the character is feeling too much depressed, too much frustrated, because though he has everything, he cannot fight with so many people against the social laws and everything. So he is feeling afraid, he is feeling depressed, he is feeling frustrated. But again, he is thinking, no, he has to do it because it's for the betterment of everything. He has to achieve what he wants. He has to achieve the goal, right? So in here, when you're talking about a person versus person or person versus society or person versus nature or machine or supernatural, whatever it is, or during all this time, you have to talk about the internal conflict. Got it? Similarly, when you are talking about the internal conflict, all right, you have to talk about why he is doing all those things, why the character is facing that internal conflict, because of some external conflict. Got it? So both of these are extremely closely related to each other. Internal and external conflict in a story are closely related to each other. When you are talking about internal conflict, you have to talk about the reason why he is facing an internal conflict. The reason can be external. Okay, but you're talking about the emotional journey of the character. When you're talking about the external conflict, it's the character's struggle with another individual, nature, society, etc. But in the way how he is feeling, how his psychology is. So you're talking about the internal conflict. So when you are talking about internal conflict, you have to talk about external conflict. When you're talking about external conflict, you have to talk about internal conflict. Both are closely related and joined with each other. Okay, so ways to create a conflict in your story. How do you create a conflict in your story? There are different ways. Basically, determine what kind of conflict your story needs. Your genre, what kind of story you are writing, will dictate the type of conflict you want to write. Thriller, for example, if you're writing a thriller, it often has a character versus character conflict, right? So sometimes a ghost story will always have a character versus supernatural conflict. Okay, an emotional story. You are writing a love story, for example. Okay, a love story will have a person versus self conflict. So, what type of story you are writing, your conflict will be based on that. Decide what your character wants. Put an obstacle in their way. So when you are writing a story, your character wants, like for example, in a love story, the character wants to marry a girl, right? He is in love with a girl and he wants to marry her. So that is what your character wants. Put an obstacle in the way. He can't marry her because she is not liking him, or there is another person, or that girl is already engaged to someone, or whatever, or the guy is too poor and the girl is too rich, whatever, right? Or the girl's father does not like that guy. So put an obstacle in the way and how the character will overcome those obstacles to reach his goal. Okay, so conflict builds when something prevents our character from getting what they want. If they got what they want very easily, there won't be any story, right? If only there are some problems or some interesting situations, then the story becomes much more interesting to talk about. Just hold on a minute, guys. Just 1 minute, 1 second. Your story, you can raise the stakes. You can, make it much more interesting, much more tough by making the desire an obsession. If you always give your characters what they want, your story will lack tension. So it will become very dull. Only conflict moves a good story forward. Very, very important thing to remember. Only a very interesting, good conflict moves your story forward. This is what your characters need in order to grow. So don't let them get off easily. Because as I said, there are two reasons to create conflict. One is character development. So, without having a conflict, when you're not giving a conflict, your character does not grow. Right. So you have to give a good conflict in front of them, a good challenge in front of them. Don't just think of a conflict as dramatic action. It can come in any form. It's not only a dramatic action, it can be, as I said, an emotional conflict, a mental conflict, or whatever. Right? It can be a social conflict, it can be a supernatural conflict, whatever. It depends on what kind of story you are writing. It depends on what kind of characters you want, or the character basically want and stand their way of getting it. Another way is create characters with opposing value. So create characters who are not just good or evil, but who are opposed to one another in more interesting way. Like there are two characters. One character, uh, wants technology to be everywhere. There is another character who don't want technology to be everywhere, who wants the normal world without technology. One character wants technology. Maybe you are writing a love story, for example. So there's a couple. The guy wants to live in the city with all the gadgets and in the digital world, but the girl loves the forest. Maybe she wants to live among the nature, without, not always all this digital, not always with this mobile laptops, everything. So automatically there is a conflict. So it's not that one of them is good or one of them is bad, but they two are very, very different people. So we can actually hear their story that, okay, now then what happened, how they decided to stay together, etc. Right? So think of someone in your life with like a best friend or family member with whom you have clashed. Maybe you have a best friend, you guys are extremely good friends, very close friends, but still you don't always agree with each other. You have something very different. Your choices are different, right? So even though you are good friends, still you sometimes fight with each other. You sometimes quarrel with each other regarding, because you have something very opposite to each other, right? So you can give that those kind of conflict in a story. Not only just make them very flat, good versus evil, but sometimes you create this kind of, you know, multi-dimensional character where the characters can be friends, the characters can be very close people, but still there is a conflict which makes them different. Okay. And basically we will ask ourselves, or we will read the story or see the film in the interest of how do they solve the problem. So each character's values will inform their decisions and impact the story arc or how the story goes. Okay. So create fourth kind is create a powerful antagonist. So if the conflict is dramatic, you create an opposing force that is just as strong than your main character. Okay, sometimes you can create, like in Avengers, we have seen Thanos, he is so powerful, right? All the characters just failed in the first part. In the last part also, almost everyone failed, right? So Thanos is so much powerful. So create a powerful antagonist. Then only your protagonist journey, your protagonist conflict, the protagonist, the fight will become very, very interesting. So a strong antagonist will create a compelling emotional conflict. Means the emotion again. If the monster is too powerful, then the hero who is going to kill the monster will be afraid, and it creates that emotional conflict, right? You cannot expect a hero to be afraid, but if the monster is too big and too strong, then the hero will be afraid, and that creates an energy, that creates an interest in the story, right? So that will make the character change, that he is afraid, but still he is overcoming his fear to become more and more powerful, right? So that will create a character arc, or make the character interesting. So first is what kind of story you are writing, your conflict will be based on that. Second, whatever the character is wanting, put an obstacle in front of him, then the character will grow, then the character will be more pushed towards the end to achieve that whatever the character wants. Okay. You can create characters with opposing value, and conflict will be created when they're not only good and evil, but same type of characters, but with some very, very different choices. So they will have a clash, they will have a fight, and that can be the source of the conflict. And also, very simply, there can be a very powerful antagonist, very powerful villain in against the powerful hero. And so there will be a very strong and interesting conflict, which may, of course, emotional and internal and external, right? In addition to this, sustain the conflict's momentum to the middle of the story. Your job during the middle of the story is to make the hero's quest as difficult as to that every moment it seems like less likely the hero will triumph. Okay, so in the middle, it has to be the most interesting part till the climax, right? From the exposition, from the introduction, if this part, rising action, this part is interesting, the middle part is interesting till the climax, your story will be excellent. Story will be wonderful. So the conflict in the middle part has to be very, very strong and make it as much difficult. Sometimes you will feel that the hero will not triumph, he will fail. Okay, then the journey becomes more and more interesting. Okay, it becomes intense. You know, you will be suspenseful that, okay, my God, what will happen, right? So introduce new problems. If you have solved one, the hero solved one problem, introduce another problem. You can complicate things. Okay, you can make the readers just like, if you're watching some movie, sometimes you just sit in the edge of your seat, right? Oh my God, what will happen next? You will feel like this. Why you feel like that? Why it becomes so much interesting is because the hero or the characters are facing so much conflict, right? That it's almost like they will fail. Okay, and you want them to win. You want them to overcome the conflict. If there is a love story, sometimes the characters will be so away, so apart from each other, you will feel no, it will be a sad ending, but ultimately maybe there is a happy ending at the last. But that middle part where the conflict is, that has to be very, 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 very strong. Second thing is strengthen the conflict with subplots. So, for example, in Lord of the Rings, if you have read Lord of the Rings, or if you have seen the film Lord of the Rings, the struggle between the Gandalf and Saruman is a secondary story. Okay, that creates the tension and central conflict of the character to deliver the ring. Okay, so that's a subplot to build a complex storyline in several layers of conflict. So there are several, you can create multiple layers of conflict. Okay, one is linked to the other you can make, especially in non-linear narrative style. If you remember, we have different subplots. So each subplots can have different problems. This is a non-linear narrative style. You remember we have talked non-linear narrative. So this is a non-linear narrative style. So each of them are subplots, and each of them can have different separate conflicts. When all of them become together, at the end, it becomes much more interesting. Of course, they have to be linked somehow, but all of them can have some conflict which will have some effect on the other characters, etc. In that way, it becomes much more interesting. Okay, so yeah, where was I? Yeah, so we can have a lot of subplots and we can add more tensions. We can bring new characters, secondary characters, etc. in the story and make it more interesting. Your main aim, guys, is to make your story worth reading. Or if you are making for a film, make the story worth seeing. You have to, you might have seen a lot of films, but some of them you didn't like, right? So if you ask why you didn't like a film, you will get the result. I didn't like the story. The story is so dull. The story is so boring. Why the story is boring? Because there is not enough good problem creation in the story. The characters' movements are not that much interesting. The plot is not that much interesting. And the more interesting films you will see that there is a very, very good, solid, complicated conflict in it. Okay. Another way of creating conflict is raise the stakes. What to lose? So if the character is not, will not succeed or will not gain or will not reach the goal, then what will happen? Got it? So give the character something to lose or create another character who is after the same goal. Then there will be a competition. When you raise the stakes and escalate the conflict through the plot, the climax should reward the reader with a big payoff, right? The characters will be the readers will be, audience will be very happy at the climax. For example, in Avengers at the last, when, ultimately Thanos was killed, after all those struggles, then it really, gave us that happiness. Finally, this fellow is defeated, right? So before that, if he's not killed, what will happen? Again, he will kill everyone. So we really wanted him to die, right? So raise this stake, create that strong, bond with the goal, with the final goal, what the character wants, okay, between that goal and the character, that the character really, really wants to reach their goal. When you make this kind of a situation and create a conflict, it becomes really interesting. Think of your story visually. Okay. When writing a novel or a short film or a screenwriter or whatever, in a movie also, your visual elements should capture the conflict best. Okay. So what you really want to show in your story, if you think like that, if you want to, visually you want to see, those are the best stories, basically. When you are reading a story, you feel like you are almost, you can see whatever it's happening. Got it? So these are basically the ways of creating conflict in your story. By creating conflict in the middle of the story in a very strong way, there can be introduction of small subplots, supporting characters, etc. The stakes can be higher. Okay, what if the character lose? What if the character fail? He will fail a lot. He will lose a lot of things. Then, of course, the conflict of that fight becomes interesting. And when you are almost visualizing the story, you can almost see the story in front of your own eyes. Then everything will be very, very clear for you. Okay, so I think you got a very basic idea about conflict. And as I said, it's one of the most interesting, and not only interesting, it's the most important part of a film or a story. Okay, without a good conflict, there is no story. The story is boring. The story becomes boring. Okay, so only when you have a good conflict, you have a strong struggle, a reason for the characters to be, a purpose for the characters, the purpose for the story, then only the story becomes, you will want to see the story or see the film or read the story. And of course, the development, if a character stays very flat, no, it does not feel good. Okay. So in stories, we have discussed a lot of things. I will just give a basic revision, because next week you will be going to write a story in class. I will be giving that as a class exercise. Okay. So I will send this whole PPT with about stories to you, so that you can read and study and everything, so that you can write a story. Okay. And I will give that exercise in the class. So you have to do it in the class. Okay. You can utilize the whole time of the class, and you have to do it during the class time. So the story we have discussed, the narration, what is a story, what a story can be, an account or events or incidents regarding a fact related to a situation and question, fictional narrative, non-fictional narrative, etc. These essential elements of the story we have discussed, characters, settings. Settings we didn't discuss, but it's like telling where the character is. Okay, it's very simple. If you are planning it, again, it depends on the genre. Genre means what kind of story you are writing. For example, you are writing a ghost story. You will see in most of the ghost stories or ghost films, horror films, there will be an old building, isn't it? There will be an old building in the middle of the woods, the middle of the forest, and there will be a ghost in there, right? If you are writing a science fiction stories, you can write a story about the future time. What will a story set in 2050, right? So you have to write about the buildings, the 100 stories buildings, the car flying in the air, all these things, right? So what kind of story you are writing, you have to very clearly define the location, the environment. Okay. If you are writing a story about about two characters inside a room, okay, you have to describe that room. What are there inside a room? Now, for example, your character is a writer. Okay. Then you have to talk about his writing desk. There are some papers. There are two pens. One of the two pen is a very favorite pen of this character. So all these small, small details, the more details you will write for the location, okay, or the environment, the more in detail you will write, okay, it's very easy for a reader to visualize, to, a visual can almost. Now, if I tell that, for example, if I'm telling that the story is happening in a forest, okay, you can almost see a forest. You can imagine, if I ask you to imagine a forest, you can imagine a forest. But if I tell that the story is happening in a very, very dense forest, there are trees which are almost 20 feet high. You cannot see the sky, that the forest is so dense that if you stand, when you are standing, you are looking up, you cannot even see the sky. The floor, the ground is very wet. It's almost like watery. It's very humid. You are feeling so warm, so humid inside the forest. There are these small bugs and there are these small insects everywhere. So when I'm giving this kind of a description of the forest, you can almost visualize, you can almost see in detail how the forest is. So when you are talking about a location, don't just talk, don't just write, Mary was living inside a house. What kind of house? You have to write that. When you will write, Mary was living inside a old wooden house, which is 2-storied high. Okay, it's a 2-story building, and she used to live in the ground floor. In the top floor, her mother was living. There were 3 rooms in the house. When you add these kind of details, right, then the story becomes much more interesting. The viewer the viewers can see the place that you are actually describing. For example, if you are telling that John was sitting in his room, okay, you are telling this. Instead of this, if you tell John was sitting in his room in front of the window, and through the window, the sunlight was coming inside and was falling on his books. His laptop was on the table, okay, and he was sitting in the chair facing the window. When you are talking about this room, when you're describing the room in a little detail, then the viewers get a much more clear idea. So when settings is all about describing the location, talking about the location in a very, very proper way in the story, that it becomes almost like a picture in front of the readers. Got it? In films also, you will see that in the beginning, they will show all the things, when they're showing a room, when they're showing a location, they will show everything very, very clearly. That in 1 or 2 shots, everything is clear that where the story is taking place. So when you're writing a story, you cannot draw a picture, right? But with your description, with your, describing the location, it's almost like you are drawing a picture. Got it? That has to be properly done when you are writing about the settings. Okay, so the location is very, very important, or else the viewer will face problems in understanding that where is happening, where all these things are happening. Okay. Next is the plot. We have discussed about plots. That is the plot, that is the line inside a story with beginning, middle, and end, right? Which binds all the parts of the story. Conflict we have discussed today, right? And it is the whole plot is centered around the conflict, and the characters attempt to resolve the problem at the end of the story in the conflict. Resolution is basically the ending. We didn't talk about resolution, but it is basically the ending. It's not something very, very this thing, but when you have to end the character's story properly, that you know, the viewers or the readers will not have confusion that what happened to the character. Okay, once they have done their job, once they have, after the climax, when the conflict is solved, when the problem is solved, then what happens to the character? Okay, so that has to be very, very clear. So that's the resolution. So we have talked about types of narratives also: linear narrative, non-linear narrative. Linear narrative where everything is told in a sequence, whatever happened in a sequence. Non-linear narratives are basically, you know, different parts. Sometimes you are talking about flashbacks, sometimes you're talking a parallel story. So there are different story plots. Quest narrative, a journey, right? A quest narrative is a story where the protagonist works tirelessly towards a goal. He's going somewhere, right? It's a journey, basically. He wants to achieve something. So it's like a journey. Viewpoint narrative is when you're talking about the characters' emotions, characters, you know, internal struggle, everything, feelings, the moods, etc. Okay. So we have talked in detail about the linear narrative, how the picture, remember these pictures very carefully. It's very easy. So the characters are introduced with different events. It is going towards a climax. Then the falling action happens from the climax to the resolution, which is what ends, what happens to the character after everything is done. So the three-act structure: beginning, middle, and end. Beginning contains the first initiation, middle, the second initiation, the villains are introduced, the antagonist and the other characters are introduced. The major conflict is in the middle. End, it starts with the climax, ends with the resolution, right? Climax is the character's final effort to solve the problem. Got it? So linear narrative, we have found some examples. Non-linear narrative, flashbacks, flash forwards. So there are different events together told. It's not in the chronological order. It's not in a sequential order. It's not told in a way that it actually happened, but in relation to each other. One story is related to another event. One event is related to another event. And that events, those things are told in a non-linear narrative. Okay. It has to be four. There are four factors. It's more interesting. It builds a parallel world. You can add the character depth, right? The flow becomes very complex, and there are more possibilities in this storytelling. How do you write? You can jump in time, talk about your flashback, talk something about the future. Okay. Dream sequence, like you have seen a dream and you are talking about the dream. Okay. But whatever you are writing, the story has to be properly organized, because in non-linear narrative, so many things are going on at the same time that it's very easy to get disorganized, right? So in the middle part, generally there are more subplots added, but everything should be linked together properly at the end. So a clear picture about non-linear narrative and linear narrative. Quest narrative is basically a journey towards a mission or a goal. Okay. And there's a very, very common type of storytelling. It's like very simple way of storytelling when a character starts from somewhere and goes to somewhere, right? So 4 or 5 elements of quest narrative: the quester, about whom the story is; a place to go, where the character is going; the reason to go, why the character is going; challenges and trials across the way, which is, I guess, I think you now know, challenges and trials across the way is conflict. Got it? And accomplishment of the quest, whether the character have got it, what he wants or not, right? So these 5 things, 5 parts of the 5 elements of the quest narrative. How to write: you describe the quest and why it is important, right? Set out on a quest, what you bring, how do you prepare, okay? Create the persona of the, you know, the drama, Okay, who will accompany you? Who are the persons with you? Describe the journey. It's very important in quest narrative. You describe the journey and difficulties of achieving it. That is what people want to see or read when they want to see a quest narrative film. Describe whether you complete your quest or not. Okay. So viewpoint narrative. Viewpoint narrative is the last part of narrative of storytelling. You know, perspective of the narrator. When a narrator tells something according what he or she feels, okay, that is what viewpoint narrative is. So in first person, that I went to work, I have done this, I have done that. Or second person, when you thought you could do it. So I am telling about your thought. If I say that you thought you could do it, then I am talking about what you have thought, right? So that is the second viewpoint, second person viewpoint narrative. Third person narrative is when the author narrating a story about the characters and refer to them as he was hungry, she was hungry, like this. When basically in viewpoint narrative, we talk about other characters' feelings. Okay, like she is a good, such a good mother, she adores his children. Okay, only she herself knew, and so only she herself and the children themselves knew it was not. They read it in each other's eyes. So here the writer is talking about the feelings of the mother, the feelings of the children. Got it? So this is how viewpoint narrative is when you are talking about someone else's feelings, someone else's emotion. Okay. How to create viewpoint narrative? You can create a suspense. Okay. You can create a reliable narrator for an unreliable narrator. For example, when the narrator knows more than the reader but withholds information, but don't tell. Okay. So that way you can create an interesting story. Create irony, comedic irony, like someone is doing something but very, very funny, but they doesn't know. Create tragic irony when the character knows less than the reader. We know that what is going to happen and we see the character going towards it, but we cannot stop it. So that is what viewpoint narrative is. Okay. So viewpoint narrative is not so much commonly used. It's a very complex type, and then we have discussed about characters in story. What is a character? Very, very, very important parts, students. Characters are very important parts. I hope all of you have understood it properly. So there can be two major characters who are the protagonist, the main character, and the antagonist, opposite of protagonist. Okay, if the protagonist is a good character, the antagonist is a bad character, like that. Okay, types of minor characters: foil, static, dynamic, flat, round, stock. Right. So all these types of characters are there. So foil character is a character which has opposite traits from one another. Okay. Static characters are characters who do not change in the story. Dynamic characters are characters who change throughout the story. Flat character does have only one type of trait, either negative or positive. Either the flat characters are either all negative or all positive. Round characters are opposite of flat characters. So they have some good, excuse me, yeah, some good, some bad. Okay, and they are more interesting. Stock characters are typical characters like mad scientist. In all the science fiction movies, there will be a mad scientist, right? In all the alien movies, there will be this mad kind of a scientist. So these are stock characters which we use sometimes in a story to make, to add an interest. Importance of character is what makes stories. If you don't have a good character, then you will not have a good story, basically. Okay, character development, how to write character, establish the character's goals and motivations, give the character an internal and external conflict, just what we have talked today. Make sure the character has strength and flaws which make them believable. If the character is only strength, only it does have strength, no negative things, we do not see anyone around us like that, right? So when the character has strength and flaws, it makes us believe in that character. Decide whether the character is static or dynamic. Okay, how much, if the character is dynamic, how much they will change, what inspires their change, do they change for the better, do they change for the worse, do they change the world or people around them. So all these things you have to think. Or there can be static characters like Captain America, Sherlock Holmes. These are few examples of static character, and that's their USP. We always, or we like these characters because they are static, right? Character should be given a past that will make them, that will justify what they are doing in the future, right? Because if the character doesn't have any idea, if you are writing a character and the character has no past or nothing in the past you have written, then it's not, it becomes a very floating character, right? It becomes an unreal character. Okay. Next is develop character's physical characteristics, how the character looks, what is the voice of the character, how the character talks, right? If there is an accent, all these things will make the character very, very real. Make the character stand out with distinctive mannerism, right? Make those small detailing in those characters. Okay, do your research and make the character believable. That is your final achievement. If you are writing a character and it seems that I can almost see the character and believing the character, right? So all these things we have already discussed. Plot of the story, again, story plots centered in one moment, right? Like the cause and effect. This happened because of this. So very easy example. A king died when the queen died is a story. The king died and then the queen died of grief. So why the queen died? She died of grief. That's a plot. So the spinal cord, the backbone of the story. It's a plot, right? So the elements of plot, it has beginning, the exposition. In the beginning part, exposition or introduction. Middle part is a conflict, rising action, right? Climax can be the end part or the middle part, both of it. End part is falling action, resolution. Okay, so different types of plot: tragedy, which ends with a sad ending; comedy, mostly happy ending, and very happy stories, good stories. Hero's journey, how it's like quest narrative stories. Rags to riches, like Cinderella, like a fairy tale story, from nothing to everything, right? This kind of story. Character has nothing in the beginning, have faced so many problems, gone through so many things, and achieve success at the last, right? Most of these stories are happy ending stories. Rebirth, where the character's transformation from good to bad, bad to good, right? So they mostly the characters have a tragic past, and through some things, a series of events, ultimately becomes the good character. Okay, overcoming the monster, simply called the good versus evil plot. Okay, there is a protagonist who is fighting an antagonist. Voyage and return, it's a basic plot where, like a quest narrative again, a character is going from one place to another for some reason and comes back. So you're writing about that journey, right? So tips to develop your plot is to create physical danger, create secondary characters who bring new tensions to the story, introduce new problems, give characters complicated history or situation, create obstacles for your hero, complicate things, remind the reader of the stake, find way to keep a protagonist moving from one location to another. Then you can talk about a lot of places at time pressure. So it's very, very closely related with creating a strong conflict. Okay, I have not written that line the last class because it might be confusing during that time, but now you know that creating a strong conflict is one of the basic idea or basic thing to develop a plot. Okay, this is the plot diagram. It starts from the exposition to the climax to the resolution, right? So this we have not done. So we have talked today about the conflicts, the purposes of the conflict, the reason to create conflict, the different types of conflicts, person versus self, which is an internal conflict, person versus person, person versus society, person versus nature, person versus machine, person versus the fate or supernatural, which are all external conflict. But in all the stories, you have to write about internal and external conflict in characters to make them more interesting, right? And there are different ways of to create a conflict. We have studied this, determine what kind of conflict your story needs based on the genre of the story, based on the kind of the story you are writing. Decide what the character wants and put a obstacle in their way. Create characters with opposing value, two different characters, two different ways of thinking. Create a powerful antagonist, create a powerful villain. Okay, sustain the character's momentum in the middle of the story. Conflict must be very strong in the middle of the story. Subplots, you can add small plots which will add to the interest of the story. Raise the stakes, remind the readers that what if this does not the character fail, what will be the result? It will be so devastating, so dangerous. Think of your story visual, then only you can write a very good story. Okay, so I hope the story part is clear to all of you. I don't know whether we have any, the video became a little longer. I don't know whether you have any time for the live class, but even so, even if you don't have, you can message me and ask me about any doubts, any question. We will, if you have in your mind, I will be clearing that. Okay, and study this properly. In the next week, we will have some class exercises. We will not study anything in the next week. In both of the classes, I will give you some class exercise to do. Got it? So if we have some time in the live class, we will meet now. Class monitor, after this video ends, inform me immediately. We can meet in the live class and we can discuss if there is any doubts. All right. So stopping this video. Bye, guys.